all so much for being here. Thanks for coming.
Yes.
We've got a lot of fans, not just in this room, but obviously across the country, around the world. After seeing American Fiction, as I mentioned, I saw it once back in January, and I tweeted something. I was so moved by it, honestly. I tweeted a couple of the quotes, but I also tweeted, American Fiction perfectly managed to be funny and heart-wrenching, a love story and a commentary on social attitudes, all while tapping into familiar family dynamics and drama. Awards are a must. And now here we are. You're an Academy Award winner for adapted screenplay writing. You just took home an NAACP Image Award. You have a Critics' Choice Award, a BAFTA Award, among many others for this film. It is your directorial debut as well, which not a lot of people can say. They've basically created an entire case of awards off of their very first film. Have you built a case for your awards?
No. I'm trying to figure out what to do with them right now. It's due to champagne problems. Can't complain too much.
Well, I mean, it's something that I assume everyone who gets into filmmaking, it's one of the goals, right? Be recognized by your peers. Was that what you set out to do, is to be recognized, or did you just set out to make the art?
No, I started out as a journalist. I was a journalist for about 8 or 9 years before I started. I was doing the work that you were doing. It wasn't broadcast, it wasn't news, it wasn't TV, but I was a writer. And anybody who gets into writing to be recognized or famous or rich is like, you've made a horrible decision. I did not set out to do that. I just set out to do it because it's what I love to do. I worked at a nonprofit right out of college. I was a communications coordinator, and I helped people. I helped them write grants and sort of like reach out to donors. It was a small nonprofit in Venice Beach, and I was making $25,000 a year. I really believed in the mission, but I didn't really love the work itself. And I would come home and write. I would just come home and write because that's what I love to do, and I needed a creative outlet. And so eventually I started freelance journalism. I started out as a freelance music journalist, and then I started building up, writing about politics, and then eventually I moved to New York and was freelancing in New York, and then I moved to DC for a little bit and was a White House reporter in DC for Obama's first year in office, and then moved back here. I was just bouncing around and doing journalism, and I really enjoyed it, and I felt like I had found a niche. I found a place that I was doing good work and work that I was proud of. But I always did want to, my artistic heroes my literary heroes have been like Joan Didion and James Baldwin, and the reason that I love them isn't just because I like their work, but what it meant to be a writer to them was very big. It was very broad. They both, people don't know this, but James Baldwin wrote the original draft of the script that became Spike Lee's Malcolm X, right? So they would write screenplays, and then they would write novels, and then they'd write a book of essays, and then they'd write an article about a politician, and sort of, it felt like they understood that art, writing can be it's like a toolbox, right? Like with a toolbox, you can build a table, you can build a house, you can build a chair. It just sort of, you utilize those tools to apply them to whatever you want to build. And so for me, that's how writing felt, but I didn't know how to get into film and TV. I didn't know anybody who worked in the industry.
It's not easy.
Yeah, I know, I've learned. I didn't know anybody who worked in it, despite the fact that I lived in LA. My friends were, doing other architects and musicians and therapists. They weren't in the industry, and so I was always like, it felt like I was always like, you could hear like this fun party going on the other side of this wall, and I was just like trying to figure out how to get over the wall because I could hear like something good going on in there, but I didn't know how to get in. And so I just was doing my journalism, and one day a guy reached out to me named Mike O'Malley, and he said that he'd read some of my journalism and said he thought I might be good at TV writing, and so he asked me to come be a staff writer on his TV show, and that's how I got my foot in the door. It was just total, hard work, obviously, but also luck. I don't like when people who have found success don't acknowledge luck and sort of like the role that luck always plays in success. And I just got lucky that this guy saw something that I'd written and asked me to come right on his show. And so, but all that's a sort of like long-winded way of saying that, I did not, this movie is in fact the first thing that I ever made in this industry just because I was passionate about it. Nobody came to me and said, we have the option to this novel and we're looking for a writer. Do you want to give us a take? Or we're looking for a TV series about, a family who's like involved in crime. Like, it wasn't a writing assignment. I'd done so many writing assignments and I'd written stuff because it felt like this would sell, this is what the market wanted. And time and again, I failed and failed and failed and failed. And right before I found this novel that I adapted, I came so close to getting a TV show on the air that they had started to tell me where the production offices were going to be. They said, like, look for your apartment here because in New York, because here's where the production offices will be in Brooklyn. And it was like, great. And so I ran the room, we wrote the entire season of TV, and then at the last minute they said, actually, we're not going to do it, and they pulled the plug. And so I was in this incredibly low moment in October of 2020, that happened in October 2020. And I was kind of feeling creatively adrift and figuring out what I wanted to do next. And I just picked up this book that I wanted to read over the holidays. I read the synopsis of it, it sounded interesting, and so I was just looking for something to read over the holiday break. And within 50 pages, I felt like, oh, maybe I want to try to adapt this. And then about 100 pages in, it felt like, oh, this is, I knew that any script that I would write would be so important, like personally important to me, because I knew that I would put so much of myself into it that giving it away to somebody else would almost feel like amputating a limb or something,
Well, you have to have a connection to your work, a personal connection to it for it to feel real. And I think that that's something that you did really well is, I know for me, watching the film, I see myself in some of these characters, the way they were written, the way they were acted, there's connection there. And I think that you having your own personal connection when you went to go ahead and adapt it really shows through. Were there some big challenges when you went to adapt it, or was it a little easier than maybe you thought it was going to be?
No, the problem with, I think the great thing about novels as an art form is that I think the novel is the closest that we can get to being inside somebody else's brain, right? I think that sort of like the interiority of novels is what's really beautiful about them, is that sort of you can just sit with somebody talking about the most mundane things, but because their brain is interesting, sort of like mundane things become interesting. That's what's great about, I think, fiction writing. And that isn't always cinematic, right? That interiority isn't cinematic. So that's actually, it's hard to adapt a book to become a TV show or a movie, because all of a sudden you have to take all this great interiority and sort of make it exterior and sort of like make it a scene. And so there was just a lot of, and the particularly the way that Percival Everett writes, I love his writing, but he's very, experimental, and, the novel Erasure, if you haven't read it, there's like a lot of imagined conversations between historical artists, and there's like this wonderful dream sequence that isn't called a dream sequence, but it seems like it is. It's just kind of this chapter that comes out of nowhere, and it's this strange game show that the lead character is on. There's all these sort of like strange, and it's like discursive and parenthetical, and in a great way that novels are, but it took a while to sort of figure out how to make this thing more cinematic, and how to make it also into what I wanted it to be, right? That's something else to consider, is that you really do have to figure out a way to make it your own, I don't think that people don't necessarily want a carbon copy, and I think that when people try to just make a carbon copy of something for an adaptation, it feels pretty passionless, right? I think that you need to figure out what speaks to you in the book, and like what really resonates with you. And for me, a lot of the family stuff resonated with me. I have two siblings, like Monk has two siblings. We have a very kind of push and pull dynamic, the way that the siblings do. Our father, I love our father very much, but he's a pretty overbearing guy, the way that the father in the book is an overbearing guy. my mother didn't die of Alzheimer's, but my mother died of cancer about 8 years ago. And toward the end of her life, I moved home to help take care of her the way that Monk does. So there was all this, it's sort of the more that I read the book, the Venn diagram between my life and Monk's life started to become a circle. And so that felt like, yeah, this is, like I said, it was, and then on top of all that, the satirical stuff is like stuff that I'd been dealing with. 3 months before I found this book, I got a note from an executive that said I needed to make a character in my book, a character in my script blacker. And I said, sit across from me at a table and tell me what it means to be blacker, and then the note went away. And so I think that to me is I just saw so much of myself in the material, and so it's not easy to do any adaptation because you need to make the internal external. But then, as you said, what made it a little bit easier was that I just saw so much of myself in this story, and so much of my family in this story, and so much of my own experiences in this story, that I think that's, writing is, for me, always a challenge. Writing's hard. I hate it.
But you've won awards for it.
Yeah. It's a terrible life I've made for myself. I'm a writer who hates writing. Now, there's this Dorothy Parker quote where she says, "I hate writing, but I love having written," and that's how I feel. The actual process of writing is a nightmare. But then when I'm done with it, I'm like, okay, I want to do that again. But it's always easier when you have something that you really love in there, right, and that you're really passionate about. That always makes the process a little easier.
Well, and something that writing what you know, I think will always speak a lot more honest than if you're trying to write something that you have no connection to and no knowledge of. I mean, you were talking a little bit earlier about your journey and all the different jobs that you had and being a journalist for quite some time.
Yeah.
How did your journalism experience prep you for writing for film and TV? Because I think a lot of times when you're young and you're wanting to break into the industry, you think there's like one straight path. You're only going to get, where you want to go if you do this, and this. But I myself have learned, and I know obviously you have as well, that there is no straight path when it comes to this industry.
Yeah.
You kind of have to hop here and there, and whether that's all in the same, line of work, like journalism, like broadcast journalism for me, but for you were able to make that leap from journalism to TV, now to film. How much did the journalism writing impact and help you to do that?
A lot. I think that journalism, I always tell people that I think journalists would make good screenwriters for a number of reasons. I think I think that journalists talk to a lot of people, so I think that they have an ear for dialogue and the way that people speak and the people's cadence and the way that different kinds of people speak differently. I think that journalists, particularly sort of like these days when, so many sort of like, there's so many fewer journalists because there's so many fewer outlets. Journalists nowadays are kind of Renaissance people where it's like you don't have a beat, you're writing about everything. And I think that kind of generalized interest helps for a screenwriter because you're writing all different kinds of people, you're writing about all different kinds of things, so having just a generalized knowledge base about the world is helpful. And then on top of that, I think that the number one thing that has helped me as a journalist is that a journalist has to sit down a newspaper editor sits down every day and says, why should this story go on the front page of the newspaper? The New York Times editor says, like, why should this go on the front page of the New York Times?
Why is this the
instead of the millions of other stories that we could be telling? And I think that to me every time I sit down to write something, I think to myself now, why should I tell this story in the year 2024? There's, out of the millions of things that I could be writing, why should this story exist now? And I think that has helped break through the noise sometimes. There's so many distractions, people, there's so many other things for people to do with their time, and audiences are dwindling more and more for film and TV. And so I think that having something that speaks to people where they're at and engages with them, with their lives as it stands, like, that doesn't mean that you can't write about something that happened 100 years ago or 500 years ago. It just means, like, you need to ask yourself, why is this story from 100 years ago applicable to people's lives now? Why did this thing that happened then what about this story is can we sort of speak to people as they exist in the year 2024. And the thing that one last thing that I want to say about Write What You Know is that I think it's important to remember that I always say is like, you know, obviously sort of like people have different experiences and different worldviews and things like that, and you've traveled to different places, but I think it's important to remember that like, you know a lot more than you think you know. And what I mean by that is like, I used to write on the show Succession. I wrote on season 2 of Succession, and there was when I first started working on it, I was like, well, you know, this is a show that's kind of about the Murdochs. It's about this white billionaire family from like England, right? And it's like, what do I know about that? But the thing that Succession did really well, and that I think is sort of evidence of you kind of know more than you think, is that the reason Succession was successful was because it was like this magic trick of Succession rather was like it made people in New York and LA like care about the Murdoch family. It made all these liberals in New York and LA like feel emotions like instead of just like anger and resentment for the Murdochs.
They're
right?
real people.
Exactly, because all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm not a white billionaire, but I know what it's like to like feel like I've like disappointed my father. I know what it feels like to sort of like have sibling rivalry. I know what it feels like to, you know, I don't, but I think that people know what it feels like to like have substance abuse issues. I know that it's like sexual hang-ups, like all of these things that actually made up the essence of those characters. You do know that because we're human beings. Like that's the great thing about, I think that art at its best, particularly film and television, you know, sometimes it can transport you, right? It can sort of like send you to a different world, and that's exciting to like watch Dune, right? And sort of like feel like you're transported to this place that you've never seen before. But then I think that something else that art can do is not transport you, but it can just make you feel like you're not alone. And just be like, this person has the same problems I have, and I can see that. And to me, that's, you know, I like the sci-fi, I like sort of like being transported to another world, but one of the things that I also really like is just like intimate character studies, and you realize like, oh yeah, this person is a white billionaire conservative who runs Fox News, but at the end of the day, they're just a person, you know, and they're suffering the same things that I suffer from, and I think that the ability for art to just sort of like make us realize that we're all more similar than we think, and just sort of like find community in that and find comfort in that, and that human beings are human beings are human beings. That to me is also one of the most important things that art can do.
Well, having characters that are tangible, right? So, like you said, someone that people can identify with their struggles, identify with their joys. Like I've had these moments before myself. You talked about, you know, this book, Erasure, was written in the early 2000s, and yet it speaks so well to today and different conversations that people are having in their boardrooms and their meetings with their, you know, with their coworkers and that sort of thing. Was there a point at which you were adapting this that you said, okay, where do you find the words that you want to keep in from the novel, and where do you kind of skew? How do you pick those points out? I think that's, you know, something
just from a very technical standpoint, the way that I set out to initially adapt the book was it would be stolen valor to not to tell this truth of it. I had my assistant read the novel alongside of me, and then as we were reading it, I had her start keeping a document of everything that happened in the book. So I was just like, take, you know, not every single scene, but just give me sort of like the rough outline of what happened. So all of a sudden, the 350-page book becomes like 22 pages. And then I went through and started saying like, okay, we don't need this, we don't need this, we don't need this, and excising the stuff that I felt like was unnecessary or sort of like going to be too expensive. There was a lot of flashbacks and stuff that were in the initial iteration. And then once I had that, then it's kind of like moving puzzle pieces around and saying like, okay, this is good, but this should go up here, and this is good, but this should go down here. And then I just started filling in the holes of scenes that I was like, okay, now what do we need here to sort of like make the story complete? And so it was just kind of putting it all in order and then sort of like puzzle piecing it is the sort of like technical way that I went about it. And I think that, you know, it's just figuring out the story that you want. So for instance, you know, this is a spoiler for the book, but the book is 22 years old, so at this point it's your fault. But you know, so in the novel, his sister is murdered. Lisa's murdered by an anti-abortion activist who comes into the clinic and kills her and kills like 6 of the other people who are in there. And you know, I was like, that this becomes a much different movie if the sister's murdered by an anti-abortion activist, right? And you can't just have a murder and then move on from that the way that you can move on from like a heart attack, right? It's like you have to really sort of like linger with that and talk about it, and it becomes sort of like politicized in this other way, you know? And so I was like, that's great for the book, but it's not the movie that I want to make, you know?
Very different message, different tone, the whole thing. Yeah.
And it's great. I love the book, but it was like, you know, I'm making something else. And so, and in the book, for instance, his father is still a cheater, but his dad, he finds out that his dad had been harboring this secret family in a different state. And he goes up and meets this half-sister that he never knew he had. And the half-sister is very resentful of the fact that their father was never around. And it's this, you know, again, a very sort of like dark, dramatic tangent. And so, again, it was like, well, I don't need that for the story that I'm trying to tell. I think the key to good adaptation is stripping away what is unnecessary while maintaining the essence or the spirit of what the author was trying to accomplish, I think. And I think that, to me, you know, the sister being murdered by an anti-abortion activist doesn't strip away from like the spirit of the novel. It's certainly sort of like different from the novel, but I think that, like, you know, it's not one of the main important themes of the book. And so I don't feel like I was doing a disservice to it by taking that out.
Well, especially these days, obviously abortion is such a not hot topic, but you know, it's something that is talked about and discussed and focused on quite a lot, and it would have completely kind of changed the course of the film. So
exactly.
You knew that there was a certain way that you wanted to put this art out, and you set out to do that pretty clearly.
Yeah, and this is a film that's already full of a lot of ideas, you know? And it's like, sometimes it's like, I think that sometimes you can see in people's first, and I totally understand why, it's like you can see in people's first films or shows or whatever, that they're like, I'm putting every single idea I've had for the past 10 years into this thing because they may never let me do it again. And I understand that inclination. But I also think that, you know, sometimes if you try to say too many things at once, you can end up saying nothing. And so I think the key is just to sort of focus on what you, like, focus on the things that you want to say and, like, save the other stuff for other projects, because you can I think you can sometimes tell when it's like people put the kitchen sink in it and you're like, this is, you know, it just starts to become confusing.
So talk to us a little bit about that moment when it was greenlit, when someone said, okay, yeah, we actually do want to make this a film and you're going to direct it, something that you had not done before. People talk a lot about imposter syndrome these days. I just do a promotion and I still feel a little bit of imposter syndrome. You know, you're like, how am I doing this? Did you have a lot of those moments, especially, I mean,
I just won an Oscar and I'm like, do people really like my movie? Still.
Was it
Still,
good?
yeah. Do people actually like it, or are they tricking me? Truly, that never goes away. I think that is, when they greenlit the movie, and I started crying in the meeting. I started crying because I thought you know, I'm 42 now. That meeting was like, I was 39 or 40. And I had reached this point in my life where I was like, it's not going to happen for me, you know? I was like, I'm going to be a journey. I had had success in television, and I had worked on really great shows, and I won an Emmy. And so I was like, it won't be like a bad life. Like, I'll be able to be creative. I'll make a good living. I'll be able to sort of like work on stuff that I'm proud of. But I just thought that I would never get to make my own thing. I'd always be working on other people's things. And I was like, okay, I kind of resigned myself to that, you know? And so when I took out this movie that I was sure, you know, I wasn't confident that people would like it. I liked it, but I was also like, I've liked a lot of the stuff that I've worked on in the past, and other people haven't liked it. And so when they greenlit the movie, I started crying. And it was like, I didn't even allow myself to think of like the work that was ahead. It was just like, oh my God, somebody's giving me opportunity. And then, once I got there, the thing that sort of helped me get the courage to direct it was that I felt really, really confident, not even that the script was good, but that I knew the story that I was trying to tell. Because I was like, I'm basically like Monk. I'm also basically Cliff. Monk and Cliff are like my two selves and sort of like two separate people. But then I was like, I know this father, I know the mother, I know this sister, I know this struggle, I know what Monk is feeling, I know Monk's frustration and his anger, like I understand all this stuff. And that's what gave me the courage to go to set every day, I was like, even if I don't know anything about lighting, even if I don't know anything about camera lenses, I do know that I'm like, I can say to the cinematographer, like, okay, so Monk is a guy who feels isolated. He's kind of turned himself into an island and alienated all these people in his life. And so that's why we start the film on like an intense close-up of Monk, is to sort of like get that idea of him being separate and sort of like him sort of existing on this island and pushing everybody out. And then when sort of like Brittany speaks up, like the camera whips away, and you're kind of like you're seeing Monk sort of like have to break out of his own world. So all of these things, so I know the emotions of the characters, and I know who these people are, and I know the story that I want to tell. And that's what gave me the courage to go to set every day, because I said, I realize you don't need to know all this stuff. You just need people whose taste you respect and whose work you respect, and these other creatives and artists who can come and help you execute the vision. And so once I learned that, that's what gave me the courage to go to set. Although the first day I almost passed out on set, and I had to excuse myself to go to the bathroom, and sort of, because I started seeing spots, and I was like, if you pass out, it was literally the first shot, and I was like, if you pass out in front of everybody on the first shot, they're not going to be big believers in your leadership capabilities.
Well, I mean, and you have such heavy hitters in this film who are there. Did you seek advice from them throughout the process, as far as the talent on screen goes, or was it mostly kind of collaborative?
It was always like so it was collaborative from that's also what gave me. So to me, I think that when you hear a lot of stories about people in this industry who throw things and yell and they berate people and they're abusive. And I've always felt like, I think people do that because they feel insecure. I think sort of like that kind of attitude comes from insecurity and fear. Yes, exactly, that's right. And it comes from, and so to me, the way that I sort of avoided that was everybody from Jeffrey on down. I sat down with my cinematographer and production designer and Jeffrey, and I said, listen, I understand that it's hard to be a cinematographer. That's a hard job. It's especially a hard job on a film that doesn't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of time. That augments the difficulty of the job. And the other thing that you have to remember is that, as I say, that I've never done this before. And so there's going to be moments on set when I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what I don't know. So there's going to be things that you say that I'm going to have to say, like, I don't get that. Could you explain it to me? And so I told everybody, like, look, if you don't want to do your hard job of being a cinematographer and then also sometimes be my substitute teacher, I do not begrudge you saying no to this job. That's totally fine. I get it. It's reasonable to say, like, I just want to do my job and I don't want to teach you. It's fine. But fortunately, everybody who signed on to the movie, I gave that speech to. And so I never went to set insecure. I certainly went to set nervous, but I never went to set feeling like I'm gonna make a fool of myself in front of these people, because I told everybody, like, I don't know. So we're gonna build this together and work on this together. And like, I want you to be honest with me, and I'll be honest with you. And when I don't understand something, I'll ask for your help. And if you want my help, you ask for my help. And so that was the set. The set was just, so it was incredibly collaborative from the beginning. It was incredibly open and like kind from the beginning. And that to me is sort of, hopefully that shows up on screen. I think that for me, I don't ever, like if this movie would have had just as much success and everybody on it was miserable and like people were crying and angry about being there, like I wouldn't want to make it, you know, it's not worth it to me. And so even Jeffrey at the very beginning, like Jeffrey, I was terrified of Jeffrey because Jeffrey's like this, I've loved Jeffrey since I saw him in Basquiat, like when I was a kid. He's like a Tony Award winner. He's in James Bond movies. He's in Batman. Like he's literally in the biggest movies in the world. And so I was terrified that I would make a fool of myself in front of him. But the thing that you learn about great actors is that the reason they're great actors isn't because they say like, leave me alone and let me do my thing. It's because they say like, let's build this together. And so the moment Jeffrey got onto set, he was like, I don't think that he should wear those shoes. Like, here's the shoes that I think Monk would wear. The Monk that I want to play, like, here's the shoes. And like, I don't think that's the right wristwatch. Like, here's the wristwatch that I think Monk should wear. And it was like all of these things where it was like, and he was thoughtful about it too, you know? It's like, I wanted Monk to wear this more expensive watch, and he was like, I think Monk is from this upper middle class family, but I think that sort of like he tries to like, he's not really interested in like the trappings of upper middle class life and wealth that way. Like he kind of wants his own thing. And he was very thoughtful about all this stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, that's great. And so let's talk about it. And then we changed his watch. So that to me also sort of, it helps put you just finding people who are there to collaborate and make the thing good and work with you and not just sort of tolerate you. And it was, it was just a tremendous experience.
Was there a point during the creation of the film where you thought to yourself, okay, I think this is going to be something that people are really going to connect with? Like, was there like a point?
No way, because that's the imposter syndrome, right? It's like, because the thing that I always say to myself is like, how many people, I'm sure that there's some people who make a movie and they're like, this is dog shit, it sucks, and I'm embarrassed that I made it. I really wish I didn't do that, right? Like, I'm sure that person exists. But I think that a lot of people, you know, put stuff out that they're really proud of. And they're like, I worked really hard on this, I love this. And how many times has somebody done that and the world does not respond that way? And says like, actually, I don't like this, you know? I think that sort of it's a vulnerable experience to make stuff. And so when we were on set, I was like, I like this, I think that this is good, but there's no guarantee that other people will, you know? There's no guarantee that you release it and people are gonna enjoy it, and you just have to, that's the scariest part about it, you know? I always had this, despite the fact that I had this great TV career, I always had this chip on my shoulder, because I was always like, can you do it on your own? Like, what if you weren't in a writer's room for somebody else's show? What if you got the opportunity to make your own thing? That's kind of one of the reasons why I was like desperate to make my own thing, was to see like, if I took the training wheels off and I didn't have a showrunner and I didn't have a writer's room, could I do this? And that's not to say that making a movie, I don't believe in the auteur thing. Like, it's like a movie is the work of hundreds, if not thousands of people. And so obviously I had help in all areas, but it was kind of like, could I steer the ship? You know, could I steer the ship one day? And so to me, that was probably the scariest part about the thing, was like seeing if you know, seeing if I needed the training wheels, so to speak, and seeing if I needed like a boss to actually sort of like make my work good, or if I could actually run something and say like, I made something that I'm proud of. And so, there's no way that I would have ever sat there and been like, this is, I'm gonna win a fucking Oscar. Like, no way. I was happy when the movie got into the Toronto Film Festival, because I was told this is like a very competitive, like, we got rejected from film festivals. Yeah. We got rejected from a couple film festivals. And then when we submitted it to Toronto, it was like, they were like, be careful because it's a very competitive year. It's like David Fincher put out a movie this year, Christopher Nolan, Greta Gerwig, Alexander Payne, Miyazaki. Like, there's just all these incredible. It's like for whatever reason, the biggest directors in the world decided to release movies this year. And so they were like, it might not get into Toronto. And so I thought, okay, so I was literally jumping up and down for joy in my kitchen when I found out it even got into the festival. I didn't allow myself to dream beyond that. It was like, I just wanted to make something and maybe have some people see it. And then when it started getting when it won the audience award at Toronto, and it started to feel like, oh, maybe it's got some momentum. And then we won more audience awards at other festivals and started to build. It felt like, oh, okay. But even then, like I said, I'm like, are they tricking me? Is everybody tricking me? Are these people are they gonna, I was like, are they gonna prank me? Am I gonna go to the Oscars and it's just gonna be an empty room and they're gonna be like, we fucked with you. You actually weren't nominated. The real Oscars are next weekend.
Like a few years ago when it was like, oh, this is the winner. Actually, no,
Yeah,
this is the winner.
exactly.
I mean, the content of the film obviously is one that people have had discussions about, like I mentioned, but I think a lot of times right now, people are really scared to offend because there are so many topics that you can offend somebody on. Was that something that you at all thought about in terms of writing this and creating it, or did you just say, this feels real to me and I know that this is my experience, so if people are offended by something that happens in this film, that's their problem?
Yeah, I think that the minute that you start thinking about what an audience is gonna like is like you've failed. Like that is sort of like the death of like, to me, like your art right there is like when you sit down to say like what are people going to like, that's like, don't do it, go do something else. Like you can go be in advertising and that's not bad. Advertising is all about what are people going to like, and if that's what you want to do creatively, that's fine. But to me, that's not a place to begin to like make art. Is like, what are people going to like? And I think that the lesson, like I said, this is the first thing that I ever made without thinking, what are people going to like? I thought about that with every other thing that I was making, and it all failed. And this was the first time that I was like, I don't care what people are going to like. I just wrote this script on spec because I liked it and I thought I wanted to see it in the world, and I wrote it, and it's the first thing that I ever wrote that got made. And so I think that there's a lesson in that. And so to me, I think that I think that like, to me, it's very hard to offend me, but I find that, I think that more it's like I knew that the movie might make people feel uncomfortable. That's something that I thought about, is like people might feel uncomfortable, but to me, when I'm consuming a piece of art and I feel discomfort, I always think that that's a sign to like lean in a little bit, because generally on the other side of discomfort is like knowledge and wisdom. And so I was like, people are maybe gonna feel uncomfortable watching this, but that's okay. It's okay if people feel uncomfortable. That's what art's supposed to do sometimes, is make people feel uncomfortable and feel like, this is, that's one of the things that the two producers of this film who were on the ground with me every day are two straight white guys. And when I first met with them, one of them said, he read the script and he was like, when I read this script, it made me feel uncomfortable. And he said, and that's why I think that we should do it, is because I like that it made me feel uncomfortable. And I think that, to me, it is, especially nowadays, again, it's like, it's so easy to just play it safe. And I think that, and I think that especially nowadays, like, I think audiences are getting tired of that. I think that's why you're seeing, I think that's why you're seeing some of these like massive comic book movies fail. I think that's why you're seeing some of these like massive TV shows that are supposed to be hits fail, because all of a sudden it's like, I think the audiences are like, want to feel comfortable. Like I'm not looking for stuff that like doesn't.
Fatigue.
Yeah, it's like I don't want something that doesn't make me think, or that's just sort of like comfort food. I have comfort food. I have sort of like comfort watches. Like there's TV shows that I like when I'm going to turn my brain off, and there's movies that I like when I want to turn my brain off. But I think that there's also stuff. I also have an appetite for stuff that challenges me a little, and I think that that's why, it was really, to me, I really loved to see this year that like there's a lot of weird movies. And like it's May December. I love May December. It's weird. It's a little challenging. It's Poor Things is challenging. It's weird. Like these are movies that I think are just not like on paper. It's like, you're gonna take a baby's brain and put it in Emma Stone and like what? Like there's a like it's like that's crazy, but it's I think that but there's a market for it, and I think that audiences now are coming back. Like we've had the pendulum of like superhero movies and sort of like these blockbusters, and now I think the pendulum's maybe swinging back a little bit to like smaller, weirder, more challenging stuff, which is, to me, that's not to say that like I love some of those huge budget things. I love some of those big action movies. I think they're great, but I just think that there's now an appetite for like, well, let's like the world is so interesting right now. It's terrible in many ways, but it's also like wildly interesting and complex and nuanced and difficult, and like I think the world is ready to sort of like
Reconnect.
see some of that. Yeah, see some of that in the art.
You kind of touched on this a little bit, but some of the students did submit some questions. I think I've touched on a lot of the themes in a lot of these questions already, but you kind of talked about this just now. Do you think the Black narrative will continue to resemble struggle and strife in the media to appeal to the white gaze? If so, what measures do you think need to be taken to give freedom to newer Black narratives?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, yes. I think that I'm an optimist in very many ways when it comes to this kind of thing. I think that in many ways our lives are getting better. Like, look, not climate change. I'm a pessimist when it comes to climate change, right? But I think that when I was a kid, the first time that I saw a trans person in a movie was this movie called Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. I don't know if anybody's seen that. But there's a trans woman in that movie, and at the end of the film, the fact that she's trans is revealed, and like there's like a 3-minute montage of like people vomiting, and like everybody's like disgusted, and like the lead character played by Jim Carrey had this sexual relationship with her, and he's like grossed out, and it's like played as this person is like gross and has been like a sexual predator. And this was like one of the biggest movies of my childhood, right? Like this was massive. Jim Carrey was like the biggest comedic actor in the world. And we now exist in a world in which hopefully, like, I don't think that movie gets made. I don't think that, it certainly doesn't get made at the budget it did, certainly doesn't get made with the actors it did. I think people are like, we've reached a point where people are like, it's not a reasonable depiction of trans people, and we don't want to put this into the world. And so I do think that, and I think the same is happening for Black stories. I think that we are seeing more nuanced representations of Black life. We are seeing a greater diversity of Black life, but I think we still have a long, long way to go. I think that there is a lot of, there's, like I said, like that. The guy asking me to make the character blacker, that was 3 years ago. It wasn't like 50 years ago. He said, you need to make this character blacker. So that was recently. There's another one of my friends she's a Black woman, and she's trying to be a TV writer, and or TV and film writer, and she's a journalist right now. And she came out to LA a couple of years ago for meetings, and she went to this meeting with these white producers, and they said, what are you interested in writing? And she said, I'm a child of the 90s, so I'm really interested in erotic thrillers. I would love to write an erotic thriller. So I'm really interested in rom-coms. I'd love to write a rom-com. And they said, okay, let us sort of like think about it, and we'll get back to you with some ideas. And so she left their office, and they called her like 3 hours later, and they said, we think we've got the perfect movie for you. It's the working title is Blind Tom, and it's about a blind slave who, thanks to a wealthy white benefactor, learns to play the piano and becomes this piano prodigy. Like, does that sound interesting to you? And she's like, well, it doesn't sound like a rom-com. It's a very weird setup for like an erotic thriller, if that's your thing, right? And it's like, and it is like, she was telling me this, and we were both laughing as hard as that person was laughing. But the sort of like implicit suggestion in that, right, is like why would we want a rom-com from you? You know, like, we have your stories. Like, what we have people who write the rom-coms, and they don't look like you. Like, you write the slave stuff. You write the inner city stuff. You don't write the rom-coms and the erotic thrillers. And so, you know, to me, there is still just, and that was 2 years ago. You know, again, that wasn't 50 years ago. That was 2 years ago. And so, yeah, we still, I think, have a very long way to go until we find equity in this. You know, and I don't want to say that like those movies shouldn't exist. Like, I really like 12 Years a Slave. I really like Boys in the Hood. I really like, there's a movie there and there in the Black Stories montage that's New Jack City. I don't know if people have seen New Jack City, but New Jack City is a movie about drug dealers in the projects, and I love that movie. I loved it. I watched it over and over when I was a kid. I'm not saying that these movies do not have value. Some of them are very good. All I'm saying, though, is that, like, yes, slavery is a part. I don't even like to say slavery is Black history. Slavery is American history. There are a lot of white people there. But slavery, yes, that slavery is part of, like, the Black experience in this country. But so is being the president of the United States now. That's also part of the Black experience in this country. And between those two poles of slave and president, there's millions of other stories that we could be telling. Why are we so interested in telling the same ones over and over and over again? Why are the people who greenlight films and books and TV shows, why are they so interested in this very, very sort of like limited aspect, this very rigid perception of what a Black person's life looks like? Why are they so obsessed with that? Because I see the diversity in the Black experience. I know the diversity in the Black experience. Everybody does. But it's like this industry just doesn't get it. They don't want to get it. And so, yes, I think it's getting better. The fact that I was allowed to make this film, to me, you know, it's getting better, but we have a long way to go.
I was going to say, I think your film really runs that thought home and that idea home, and it allows people to see the other types of stories that can be told about Black families, about families of color just in general. We all have moms who may have Alzheimer's. We all have dads who may have cheated on our mothers. We have sisters who have died, you know, quickly and without any warning. And I think that was just what made your film so powerful, and hopefully those higher ups in the industry really do see the connection that audiences made with the film and understand that that is what audiences are craving. I do want to ask, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that is right. I think that's one of the things that has been nice about the film's reception to me, is seeing that like every kind of person now has come out of the movie and told me that they found something that resonates with them. We've shown it in France and England and Brazil and all across the United States, and predominantly white audiences, Black audiences. And at this point, it's like every single kind of person has come out and told me that they found something that they enjoy, because I think that even if you can't empathize with Monk's struggle, I think that ultimately we all can, right? Because I think that it's like, I think the theme, one of the themes of the film is our desire to be free to be who we want to be, and when the weird things that human beings will do when we feel like we are not given the freedom to be who we want to be. And I think a lot of people can empathize with that. But even if you can't, as you said, most of us are born into families. We have siblings that are pains in our ass. Our parents get old. People get sick. But even you know, I had an actor tell me in London that he said that he was doing an audition. He's an Asian man, and he was doing an audition, and he said that the casting director told him to Chinese it up when he was doing his audition, and he was like, "I'm Korean." And again, this was 4 years ago. He said this happened.
So, and that's, you know, it spans every person of color, every, you know, even the white experience is not the same for every white person that it's written for either. So what can people expect from you? This is my last question. What can people expect from you in the future? Obviously, you're riding high right now.
I'm working on a TV show with Scarlett Johansson. There's going to be her first foray into television, and so I'm working on it with this guy John Wells, who created ER and was the showrunner of Western for a while. And so he and I are writing this kind of legal thriller that Scarlett Johansson is supposed. It's like a limited series, so we just started the writers' room for that last week. So, we'll see if it happens. I hope that it will, but you have no idea. But as far as movies, I'm writing a Western. I'm writing a contemporary neo-noir Western about these two brothers who their father dies, and in order the executive of their father's estate is their third brother, and neither of them have seen their third brother in 6 years, and so they kind of take off through the American Southwest looking for their third brother. And it's I'm from Tucson, Arizona, and I just think the American Southwest is so cinematic and beautiful. And it's also a place where you don't really see black people a lot of the time. It's like a lot of these stories are not told from a black perspective, so it's a contemporary Western, noirish thriller thing.
Seeing people in spaces that you don't normally see them is definitely your niche.
Exactly. Exactly.
I just want to say thank you. I hope that everyone here really enjoyed this.
Thank you. I really love being here. You guys are the best. Thanks for coming out.
Go Lions.
Want to take a photo?
Yes, we're gonna take a photo.
Okay.
You ate that up.
Thank you. Your work is amazing. Thank you so much.
Love the film.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think maybe. Yeah, yeah.
Tell me where to go.
I think that you three, Dean, Cord, and go up and stand right here. And
Stand
then just
here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just right here.
Carefully.
On this platform?
No, come down
On the ground?
Yeah.
That's common.
So you three, then everyone can stand up around this. So if everyone can stand up. So you're like a family sort of thing. Stand up, squeeze in.
Oh, how about I
Right here. There
I know, it's a shallow space.